Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stitches and Stories Studio, the podcast where we talk about writing, publishing, the creative process, and building an author life that feels both sustainable and fulfilling. If you're new here, I'm Millie, and I publish under the pen name of Melissa L. Story, where I write science fiction with strong women, first contact, mystery, and a little bit of wonder threaded throughout the stars. I also write across genres. You can find me as Lynn Story for my contemporary romance, and my crime noir also comes under the pen name of Melissa L. Story. Now this means I spend a lot of time thinking about not just stories themselves, but the tools and the systems that writers can use to finish them. And somehow, wonderfully, we've made it to my 10th episode. And that feels like a good place to take a pause and say thank you for being here, reintroduce myself to anyone who just found the show, and let you know that as an indie author, I'm a working writer, a person with a day job, deadlines, half-finished notes, ambitious plans, and the same recurring questions that most writers have. How do we get all this work done in a creative and practical way without going completely out of our minds? That question is what's been shaping these last 10 episodes. In recent weeks, we've talked about writing software and workflow tools. We've covered Word versus Google Docs. We've talked about Scrivener, Atticus, and Notion. And today, I want to stay in that same neighborhood, but move to a slightly different part of the writing journey. Today, we're going to talk about Plottr, which we've talked about a little bit before, and Vellum. These are sort of our bookend softwares. So these tools live much closer in the planning and story structure side of the process, and the other more in the formatting and finished, polished side of our process. So in this episode, we're really going to be talking about what happens before and after. Before we get started into that, though, I do want to talk about the ProWriting Aid contest. I think this is an exciting opportunity for anyone who's gotten their first 5,000 words done on their very first book or of their first story, or a new story. It doesn't have to be your first. But ProWriting is currently running its Novel Beginnings competition. The contest is aimed at unrepresented, unpublished fiction writers. The basic idea is that you submit the first 5,000 words of your work in progress. There's a grand prize of $50,000, and there's also shortlisted awards that are worth $5,000 each. According to ProWriting Aid's current contest information, the submissions are open until March 31st, 2026, and the winner will be announced in May. So this is an exciting opportunity. You can connect with other writers. If you're just starting out, you get some feedback on your work. You can have a little fun. The first 1,000 words does not have to be polished, or print ready. It's about discovering your voice, and if you have a good solid start, getting some feedback and how you can improve, and that will carry over into the rest of your story. You can get some feedback from a professional, so you can do a little networking, and maybe talk to other writers who are experiencing the same journey or similar journey as you. Not to mention the prize money is really a great opportunity to fund some of this writing software we've been talking about, and maybe fill in some gaps in your personal life while you're writing. So in my mind, it's really a win-win situation. The worst that can happen is you get some incredible feedback from some industry experts. Now, let's talk about the before and after of your story and these tools that help make sense together. Plottr and Vellum are not in direct competition with each other. You want to use them as part of the same process. They do occupy your workflow. Plottr is going to be at the beginning, Vellum is going to be at the end. Plottr, as I've mentioned before, is much more about planning, visualizing, outline, keeping track of story structure. Its official materials emphasize timelines, plot lines, character and place templates, story bibles, which I find amazing, and ways to map out individual books or a full series. So in plain language, Plottr is trying to help you see the bones of the story before the whole thing collapses into 270,000 words or something crazy. Vellum, on the other hand, is built around book formatting. its official site focuses on producing professional-looking ebooks and print interiors with export options for EPUB and print-ready PDFs. It is much less about brainstorming and much more about that final manuscript and making it look like it's ready to be published. It's a publish-ready book. It's your polish on your appearance and your layout. Today, we're going to talk about them both and why Plottr is what you might use before and during your draft to help shape the story, and Vellum is what you're going to use when the manuscript is done, revised, edited, and ready to become that polished book. Now let me give you a disclaimer here. Vellum is an Apple-only product. While Plottr is available no matter what platform you use, Vellum is Apple only. And so for Apple users out there, it's worth the money. I use it for every book. So it's a one-time fee, and you can actually go in there and set your book up and everything. You don't actually you can download it for free, set up everything, but until you hit publish or until you ask for it to download, that's when you have to pay. So you can go in and play with it for free and see how it looks, and see what it can do for you in the different, styles and typesets and things like that. But when you're ready to actually hit publish and download it into your EPUBs and PDFs, that's when you're going to have to pay the fee. But again, it's another one that I think, if you're a Mac user, is well worth having in your arsenal. It makes things so much easier. I've done my first book where I had to format it by hand in Word, leaving for the bleed and, trying to find the right consistent way to break, scene breaks and stuff in the story. And it's can be very frustrating, especially if you're new at it. So something like Vellum, to me, is a godsend, and the same with Plottr, and we'll get more into that in just a quick second. Okay, so starting with Plottr, it is self-described as visual planning software for writers. It offers baseline plotting, plot lines, views, templates for different story structures, and a story bible for keeping track of characters, places, and other details. And if you're a visual person and you have pictures of places or characters, people who inspire characters, or what you think your characters would look like, you can import those as well. It's very, very handy. So once you're done with your story bible or your outline and other details, you can export it to Word if you're writing in Word. And we talked about Scrivener last week. You can also import from Plottr directly into Scrivener if you have chosen that software as your writing tool. So this matters because many writers don't want to do all their drafting inside the same tool as they do for planning. You want to keep the two things separate. And the way Plottr helped me is because if I tried plotting or outlining my stories by hand, like in Word or even on paper, and I have a tendency to, once I start kind of plotting a chapter, I just go with it. I keep running. My brain kicks in to the story, and next thing you know, I'm 5 chapters in, and it's no longer really an outline. I've started drafting the story, and then I have forgotten, a character's name from chapter 1, and I'm now in chapter 6 or something like that. And so it's really messy for me that way. So Plottr really helped kind of keep me on track in the drafting process. And while I was able to build the story in a timeline, it also kind of kept me in control and kind of reined me in so that I could keep within the drafting kind of mindset. So I find it, and I was never a plotter before. Or an outliner. I still consider myself a discovery writer, but this does help me. And you can get as detailed in Plottr as you want, or just keep it simple. It's up to you. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. But I digress. Again, if you're the kind of writer who has a promising idea, maybe even several promising ideas, but then gets lost in the middle, lost in the structure, lost in the pacing, like I do, and then don't forget you've got to kind of keep track of your subplot and where that goes. Or if you've got side characters that, it's easy to forget their names, and you kind of forget what that was 3 chapters ago. That's the strength for this visual plotting tool. It lets you take a step back. Instead of staring at one chapter and wondering why the story feels muddy, you can look across the whole arc at once, and you can see the major turns happening. You can see whether one plot line disappears for too long, and you can see whether a romance is developing, if that's part of your story. If there's mystery, if the mystery clues are landing, if you're writing something with mystery to it, and then also just keeping track of that emotional journey for any of your characters and making sure it doesn't just stand there and jog in one place. That perspective is useful because story problems often do not live in the actual sentence you're currently fussing over. It lives in the pattern, in the story structure, and the arc. And these patterns are easier to see when the story is laid out kind of in front of you in a more visual and structural sort of way. So Plottr is especially good for writers who are planning their novel, planning a series, or juggling multiple character arcs, are trying to learn structure in a more visual way. It is also especially useful for genre writers who rely on pacing and relevant management. So mystery writers, romance writers, fantasy, science fiction, thriller writers, all because those genres often have moving parts that benefit from being tracked in a little more deliberate way. If you write by instinct and that instinct serves you beautifully, you may not need a plotting tool at all. And that's fine. But if you often reach that messy middle and then realize you've built a gorgeous opening and absolutely no bridge to the ending, then Plottr may be your answer. And you'll be able to spot some of those blind spots sooner in the story before you get too far. And that makes it a little bit easier to correct. These things matter because discovering a structural problem before you've written 50,000 words is different from discovering it after you've written those 50,000 words and you develop a personal grudge against chapter 14. And that sounds like a joke, but I'm not kidding. It happens. You suddenly start hating, the story, and it's really not the story's fault. And it's just kind of the way it's laid out and because you got lost along the way. So, you want to be fair to the story too. So an honest caution here is that not every writer enjoys planning in a visual software-based way. Some writers love outlines on index cards, notebooks, maybe storytelling or story drafting, as I mentioned before, on paper. You don't want to pre-decide too much. Some will open a plotting tool, admire it, color code 3 things, and then wander off to make tea and avoid the actual work. So you don't want to do that either. So I would not present Plottr as a magic answer or requirement for everybody. I do present it as a tool that is particularly useful for you if you're struggling with the clarity of structure. They do have multiple templates to help you, and you can choose which one works best for you. If your issue is not the outline, but your real issue is the time and focus and confidence or getting yourself back into the chair, then Plottr may be a lovely answer without actually being the solution. If you enjoy doing it, you're going to go back to it. So if you're enjoying using Plottr, then it's going to help you get the butt back in the chair to keep going with your story and hopefully prevent some of the procrastination that we all fall into sometimes. If you're newer to writing or you're trying to become more intentional without overwhelming yourself, I think there are some simple ways to use a tool like Plottr. You can use it to sketch out the beginning, the middle, and the end before you draft. Again, keeping it very simple, and that's not a detailed outline. You can use it to track the main plot line and one subplot. You can use it to keep character notes so they don't change. You want to develop your character and have them grow within the story, but you don't want to change eye color midway through the book or something like that. If your characters are not having emotional breakthroughs in chapter 6 and then begin behaving as though nothing has ever happened in chapter 7, that's gonna help you track that character arc and make sure that the story and the character are developing throughout the book. So this can be very helpful. This kind of review is invaluable in my opinion. Even if you're not a natural outliner, like I said, I'm not. It taught me how to be an outliner in a way. I don't do heavy outlines. I don't do a lot of deep, detailed things. I don't put dialogue in my outlines. But I just kind of I do enough to keep me going. And I mentioned before about Jay Thorne's 3-beat method, and I use that for regardless of what genre I'm writing. I use it in crime noir, I use it in romance, and I use it in sci-fi. Could be because that's the way I learned, and so that one sticks with me, but there are so many different ones in Plottr to choose from, and some of them are genre specific, so that can be very helpful to you too, and it's also an excellent learning tool, so I would highly recommend it. Now, that's the beginning of the process, and then you may use Scrivener or Word or Atticus to actually draft your story, but at some point you're going to get to the end and you're going to want to format it. Especially, even to send it to, I at least format mine before I send it to my editor. You can send it in manuscript format and talk to your editor and see what kind of format they prefer. I try to make it look a little bit more polished before I send it to them. I don't want them to have to make, any kind of corrections or things that I'm paying for that Vellum will do for me. So I just use all of my tools before I send it to my editor. So Vellum, official site emphasizes that it's a professional formatting tool for ebooks and print books with clean style options, automatic generation of front and back matter, instant previewing, and exports for major publishing platforms. Vellum is widely known in the indie author space for helping create very polished interiors without having to become a full-time interior designer. And I'd like to pause here for a moment and just say some of the beauty of the front and back matter is you save that, and you can, especially if you're writing a series, you can carry that from book to book and you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time. It will ask you if you want to use any of the material from the last book that you formatted in Vellum, and you can say yes, and so that material will come forward and you don't have to recreate it, which, you may have to tweak it in case like the copyright year changes, but it saves you so much time on some of the little minute details when we're writers and we're more focused on the story. So that kind of helps get rid of some of the tedium as far as formatting your book. It also gives some consistency, which makes it look very professional as well. Formatting is one of those stages where writers are often don't think about, or they underestimate until the time arrives to do it, and then you're struggling with what you need to put in your front and back matter. So drafting is our creative process, revising is demanding, and editing can be just completely humbling. But formatting is where a lot of writers discover that a manuscript and a finished book are not the same thing at all. And manuscripts might be ready in terms of content, but the file still needs to become readable, professional looking. It needs chapter headings, spacing, page breaks, trim settings, ornamental choices, print layout decisions, and all these little details that kind of go unconsciously noticed when you're a reader, but as a writer, it makes a difference on how your product looks. So Vellum makes it a little bit easier and can make it more elegant as well. And one of the reasons that so many authors like myself use it, and again, I'm not getting anything in return from Vellum at all for this, I'm telling you this because I use this product. A lot of us have a genuine affection for this product. It takes, again, something that's technically annoying and just makes it feel much more manageable. Importing the manuscript is very easy, and you can develop or apply a design style. Again, saving that throughout your series if you have one. You customize your headings. You can have ornamental breaks instead of just 3 little asterisks in the middle of a page. You can preview the book to see how it's going to look on an e-reader. You can then export the files for ebook and for print. And for print, it's PDF. And then from there, you can upload it into whatever place you're going to publish it, the ebook from, so Drafted Digital, KDP, things like that. I say that things go unnoticed, but if they go unnoticed by a reader because they are professional and they meet the expectation of your eye, but if something is not formatted correctly, then the reader will notice, and you want your book to be the best it can be as far as story, but as far as presentation as well. If you're having dinner, if something doesn't look good on your plate, it doesn't appeal to you, I don't care how much your friend says it's going to taste good, you're going to have an aversion to eating it. Same with the book. Someone might tell you the story is great, but the formatting's off and it's sloppy and it's not consistent, and page numbers are off, chapter numbers. You're not going to care. You're not going to get into the story because you're going to be distracted by all of those things. So you need something like Vellum to take care of that for you, so you don't have to learn how to do typesetting yourself. And certainly you can pay someone to do it for you. There are many, many awesome people out there who can do that for you. So a major and practical caution with Vellum is that, as I mentioned before, it is Mac only. That does not mean that Windows users do not have good options. It just means Vellum is not really one of them. So for writers, the conversation kind of ends there entirely, if you're not a Mac user. The second one is that it is a formatting software. It's not a drafting environment. It's not a plotting tool. It's not going to help you with editorial issues, things like that. It's really the finished product of your book. And so if you're still trying to figure out what your story is, hold off on getting Vellum. If you're a Mac user, wait till the end, wait till it's been edited, all that sort of thing. At least a first blush at editing before you sink the money into Vellum. It is something that is widely used by many indie authors. 6- and 7-figure authors that I know use this product. And again, it does cover both e-book and print. It gives you a lot of control over what your end product looks like. And it takes some weight off of your shoulders for the more mundane and technical side of things. So, that being said, how do these tools, both of them, fit into your overall workflow? And so the most useful place to land with the software is you're not building your whole process around just one tool. A realistic workflow is going to have many tools. Something where you brainstorm and map out the story, like Plottr. Draft the manuscript in Word, Google Docs, Scrivener, Atticus. And then you can revise and edit in those environments if you prefer, or even another environment. Like I said, I use ProWriting 8 and AutoCrit, which is probably overkill, but I do use them both. And then your final manuscript will go into Vellum for formatting. So, or maybe you don't use Plottr at all because notebooks work better for you. And when I get stuck sometimes, I have to get out a spiral notebook and just write it down and kind of work it out myself that way. But there really isn't an option like that for the formatting. You still need a tool like Vellum. At the end, there's really no way to kind of manually wrangle that. There's some other programs out there, and we'll get to them next week, that offer formatting for you. But again, I'm a Mac user, so Vellum is a natural one for me. Vellum both useful. They're useful in different ways and in different stages of your writing. Again, Plottr is about planning, structure, visual mapping, keeping the stories moving parts visible, while Vellum is about the formatting, the polish, the presentation, and turning your finished manuscript into a professional-looking book. Neither one is required. Neither is valuable. Both can be genuinely helpful when they line up with a problem that you're actually trying to solve. And then, in reality, the theme that I keep coming back to is the workflow. In these workflow episodes, is that the goal is not to collect software. The goal is to reduce friction in the process. The goal is to support your writing life in a way that fits your energy, your budget, your habits, and your ambitions that you have. If you've been curious about Plottr, think about whether you may need more structural visibility. If you've been curious about Vellum, think about whether you need a smoother path to polished book files. And if you're still at the stage where you're trying to write chapter 1, give yourself permission to focus on the writing and worry about the rest of this later. Trim size isn't important right now. Getting your story down is the key. So I want to say thank you so much for spending time with me today, especially for being here on episode 10. I appreciate every listener, every kind word I receive in your emails and your comments, every fellow writer trying to make room for stories in a busy life. And I'll put links to all of this in the show notes today, as well as my contact info if you have any questions. If you want to learn more about me and my books and my short stories, you can find me at stitchesandstories.com, on socials as Melissa L. Story for Facebook, X, and Substack. And you can email me at millie